Okay, hopefully this time we won't have any dog attacks or interruptions or phone calls, but this section is going to be a little bit short, I hope. So remember, we ended with the Royal Proclamation of 1763, in which the King of England basically said everything we fought for in the French and Indian War, at least, and everything that the colonists fought for in the French and Indian War, the colonists couldn't have. They couldn't move into the Ohio Territory. They didn't get anything. Now, what did the British get? They got all of Canada. They got all of the holdings of the French in North America. The French, with the exception of the Louisiana Territory, which we'll talk about much later. But the Louisiana Territory was land that was beyond what was resolved in the Treaty of Paris. But essentially, in the Treaty of Paris, the British got all of Canada, which is why Canada is part of the British Commonwealth of countries. Anyway, but it didn't stop there. Remember I told you the importance of money in all of history. We're going to see that again. Because what happened during the French and Indian War was that England spent so much money, it was basically broke. There was no money in the treasury. The king had no more money. There was nothing in the cupboard. And as a result, the British government was in a bit of a pickle, as they say. What are they going to do? You can't run a government without money. So when a government needs money, what does it do? It raises taxes. So no money? All you do is raise taxes. Now, you should know from talking to other people and listening to your parents complain about taxes and whatever, that taxes are not a popular thing. But what you should know about this is that the British first raised the tax in England. First, they raised the tax on their English people, not colonists. But eventually, the king and the parliament were sitting around, and I guess they were thinking, only rightly so, hey, we just spent a gajillion dollars and sent the largest navy and army in the history of the world to fight against France in order to get this land, which was for the benefit of the American colonies. So why should we English people over here in merry old England be the only ones who have to pay taxes? They said, heck no. We should require the colonists to pay a part of the taxes as well. Now, personally, I don't think that's unfair. I think it's perfectly reasonable, but I wasn't alive then. I probably didn't have anything to say about it. Anyway, so whatever I think doesn't matter. What does matter is that in August 5th, to be precise, of 1764, the British imposed the first tax on the colonies. So this is 10 years after the beginning of the French and Indian War, and 1 year after the end, they finished. So 1 year after the end of the war, they imposed a sugar tax on the colonies. Now, that was not very popular because, everybody likes their sugar and everybody eats their sugar. And when you have to pay more for your sugar, you get kind of cranky, right? Because you can't have your morning cup of tea with 5 tablespoons of sugar in it. That makes you grumpy. So the colonists were really upset about this, and they complained to the king, and so the Sugar Act was repealed. And you remember repealed means it was gotten rid of. It was taken back. We said, it's like saying, oops, we made a mistake, we're taking it back. No more sugar tax. So the British thought about it and they said, well, gee whiz, we still don't have any money and we still need money. Maybe we could tax something different that not everybody uses and maybe it would be all right. So in March of March 22nd of 1765, they created a new tax, a tax on paper goods. And that was the Stamp Act, very famous in American history. Most people forget the sugar tax, but that was really the first one. But it only lasted for a short time, so I guess people forget about it. But the Stamp Act was basically said that if you buy or sell paper goods like newspapers or legal documents or playing cards or I don't know, other paper stuff, you had to get these little stamps on your package which said that you paid the tax on whatever the paper thing was that you were buying or selling. So if you didn't have the stamp on the paper, you were basically breaking the law and you were a smuggler or engaged in black market sales of paper. Well, needless to say, that went over like a lead balloon, largely because the people who really used the paper were the wealthiest people in the colonies. They were the lawyers, they were the accountants, they were the people the businessmen who used paper goods. Of course, everybody played cards because back then there was no television, there was no video game, there was no nothing. So the only thing you could do at night was play cards, right? So I guess they got mad about the cards, but a lot of people were very angry about the extra cost of doing normal everyday things. You buy and sell a house, you need legal documents, you have to pay a tax on that. Of course, it's no different than what we have today, and in fact, our taxes today are hundreds of times higher than the taxes that the English imposed on the colonies, but that's a whole nother story. Again, it doesn't matter what our point of view is. What's important is to understand the point of view of the people who lived at the time. Well, the Stamp Act raised a whole lot of objection. Colonists started basically rebelling. But it got worse. In March of that same year, 2 days later, March 24th, 1765, Parliament and the King imposed something called the Quartering Act. Quartering is the practice, or was the practice at the time, and still legally is the practice, of having soldiers be allowed to stay in the houses of citizens whenever they wanted to, without giving them any notice and without paying them. So you'll remember that we watched one episode of the Liberty's Kids in which the characters were at Phyllis Wheatley's house and the soldiers came in and required the household to let them sleep in their beds, feed them, wash their clothes, do all of that stuff. Now, that got people really angry because as the colonies started to protest more and more, and there became more and more talk of revolution, the British were sending more and more soldiers. And as a result, the Quartering Act was very offensive to people. After all, how would you like it if somebody knocked on your door and came in and said, hey, get out of your bed, I'm sleeping here tonight. By the way, go clean my underwear. In August of 65, the Sons of Liberty were formed. Later, the Daughters of Liberty were also formed. In March of 1770, all of the actions of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, all of the protests, the things that they were doing, the tarring and feathering of tax collectors, the attacks on the British governor of Massachusetts, things like that were taking place. And the British sent more and more and more soldiers. And as the soldiers came in, there were more and more confrontations where Sons of Liberty and citizens on one side, soldiers on the other side. And before too long, things got out of hand. And in March of 1770, you had the Boston Massacre. And you remember, the Boston Massacre was hardly a massacre, but that's how the people at the time made it look. It made it look like the British fired on, peaceful protesters who were not doing anything wrong. But in fact, you remember, there were 5 British soldiers. Most of them were young. I'm sorry, not 5, but a relatively small number of British soldiers, and a whole lot of colonists who were yelling nasty things at them, threatening to kill them, throwing snowballs at them, waving pitchforks, and doing all that usual stuff that people do when they're having a riot. And the soldiers became scared, and they fired on the crowd, and 5 people were killed. That's where I got the number 5. Sorry about that. Anyway, I got to stop. As usual, my big mouth runs too long.